Thank you for being here. I'm Doyoung Park, and I'm going to present about an fMRI study on how working memory is represented in the high-order cortical regions. I have no disclosures. So working memory allows us to keep information in mind after the original sensory input is gone, so that we can guide our behavior based on that memory. The prefrontal cortex has been considered a key region for working memory based on lesion studies or neurophysiological and fMRI studies suggesting sustained activity in PFC. And the parietal cortex is also considered important as part of a high-order network. But previous studies using fMRI pattern decoding have shown that memory contents are often detectable in the sensory cortex, while representations in the PFC are less consistently observed. While sensor cortices can maintain working memory contents, they are also constantly engaged in processing new inputs. When new stimuli of same modality arrive, this overlap can disrupt the stored memory traces. To avoid such interference, the brain may retain essential information in a more abstract format, distinct from low-level sensory details within high-order cortical regions. And if high-order cortical representations support robust maintenance, they should be consistently present during working memory, regardless of input modality. And such high-level information may be generalizable across different modalities. So our question is whether the higher-order cortex indeed maintains supramodal representations of working memory contents. To answer the question, we need to directly compare working memory representations of different modalities in one study. We chose to examine tactile and visual systems, since both systems can process shape information and cross-modal recognition ability is well known. Moreover, separate studies suggested both tactile and visual working memory contents could be decoded in posterior parietal cortex. These findings suggest the possibility of shared neural code between the two modalities, and so indicating that their direct comparison is well suited for probing supramodal representations. So in our fMRI experiment, 29 participants performed delayed match to sample tasks in 3T scanner. Participants remembered tactile or visual braille patterns and indicated whether sample and probe match in shape. And the tactile stimuli were automatically delivered using a system that we previously developed. Participants had to move their right index finger into the presentation case to touch the stimuli. And since there's a possibility that the common representations might be necessary only when there's a task demand to make comparison across two modalities, we also presented tactile to visual and visual to tactile cross-modal tasks during which sample and probe of different modalities were compared. And I will refer to these four tasks with the abbreviations TT, VV, TV, and VT. And before investigating the common neural code shared across modality, we first need to find the common neural substrate for both modalities. So to examine the working memory representations during each task, we defined discrimination index based on voxel pattern correlation. We split the data into two halves and derived activation patterns corresponding to each stimuli. Then we calculated correlation between the activation patterns, and the discrimination index was defined as correlation within the same stimulus minus average correlation between different stimuli. So the discrimination index greater than 0 means stimulus selective neural response patterns, implying decodable information of stimulus identity. So we found that the stimulus identity could be decoded from the superior parietal cortex in both tactile and visual working memory tasks. Also, during the cross-modal tasks, the discrimination index was significant in the superior parietal cortex, But additionally, working memory information was retained across broader regions, including the prefrontal cortex and inferior parietal cortex. Then we clarified the overlapping areas like this. So all task overlap was found in the superior parietal cortex, while cross-modal specific representations were found in the prefrontal cortex and inferior parietal cortex. And since the results are more prominent in the left hemisphere, which is contralateral to the tactile stimulation site, we focused on the left side ROIs in further analysis. The results were consistent in the anatomically defined ROIs. So SPL and IPS in the superior parietal cortex showed significant discrimination index for all tasks. And on the other hand, in the DLPFC and angular gyrus, the stimulus decoding was only significant during the cross-modal tasks, but not during the within-modal tasks. And we also examined the sensory areas. So especially during the within-modal tasks, while somatosensory cortex showed significant discrimination index for the task TT, but not for VV. Visual cortex showed the opposite results. So the results suggest modality-dependent representations in the sensory areas, which is consistent with previous studies. So to briefly summarize, we found two types of working memory representations in the higher order cortex, along with modality-dependent representations in the sensory areas. So next question is whether these regions hold shared representations across tactile and visual modalities. For this, we examined whether Braille identity could be decoded across tasks. We calculated a cross-task discrimination index similar to the analysis within each task, but comparing activation patterns between different tasks. We also conducted SBM-based cross-task classification analysis, where we trained the classifier on activation patterns from one task and tested it on patterns from a different task. In SPL and IPS, we found that cross-decoding was significant across TT and VV, as well as TV and VT, indicating shared representations across two modalities during within-modal and cross-modal tasks. Moreover, the cross-decoding was significant in all the other task pairs, suggesting common neural representation shared across tasks regardless of the modalities and task demands. And the classification analysis yielded consistent results. So these results suggest that the superior parietal cortex retains supramodal representations during working memory. On the other hand, in the LPFC and angular gyrus, where stimulus identity could be decoded only during the cross-modal tasks, we found significant cross-decoding between TV and VT, but not between TT and VV. These results suggest that the regions do not support modality-independent representations in general, but rather encode stimulus information in a way that is specific to cross-modal working memory demands, regardless of the direction of modality transition. To summarize, we identified common neural substrate in the superior parietal cortex during all tasks, and we found the prefrontal cortex and inferior parietal cortex as cross-modal task-specific regions. Importantly, the superior parietal cortex maintained shared representations across all task pairs, indicating supramodal representations, while prefrontal cortex and inferior parietal cortex retained shared representations only during cross-modal tasks. So in conclusion, our findings suggest two different types of higher-order cortical representations, so supramodal and cross-modal representations. So these high-level representations common across modality may support working memory maintenance together with the sensory representations. So I'd like to say thanks to my supervisor, Professor Soo-hyun Lee, and my collaborators and my lab members as well. And this work was recently published, so please check out the link and visit the poster session for further discussion. Thank you for listening.
And we have a moment for questions. I got one here submitted online saying, how do you interpret cross-modal only result when decoding on the within modal condition is lacking?
So I think the cross-modal only representation is like task demand representations. It is present only when there is a need to compare between the two modalities indirectly, explicitly. I mean.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Are there any other questions in the room? I was wondering about the potential role for cross-modal, and specifically supramodal representations for visual imagery. Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think it can suggest that visual imagery is also the supramodal representation has some role for visual imagery as well, since it gives a generalizable representation across the tactile and visual modalities. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Thank you again.
Thank you.